Good morning or good evening to you for all of you who are in India, and welcome to today's Monday class. I'd like to invoke the presence of the Masters to be with us this morning and for us throughout this week. Om. May the Masters bless us, the great Masters of self-realization. I bow to you all. May you keep us in thy lap, Mother, and guide us to our true home in thee. Om Shanti. Some years ago, I heard a story, or maybe I read the story, and it was about a yogi who a young man had come to him, and the young man was spiritually inclined, and came with questions, and he asked the yogi. He was faced with a choice. One part of himself wanted to dedicate his life to God, and another part had worldly ambitions, and he was wondering if he should go into business and perhaps maybe he should take up a career and then, put his spirituals aside and take up a career and get that out of the way and then take up the spiritual life. And the yogi answered him, as you might, I don't know if he answered him this way. He said, I think you ought to go into business. And which was a little bit of a strange answer. He says, but if you do want to take up the spiritual path, you should go you need to understand, you're going to need to go all the way. And obviously he had probably answered in the way he did because he saw in this young fellow that he didn't have what it takes to go all the way. Or maybe he said it that way, says if you even have to ask that question, you're probably not ready to go all the way and to take up spiritually the life of the renunciate that he was thinking about contemplating. Who knows? But nevertheless, it was an interesting question, and I've interpreted it a couple different ways over the years. And I was thinking about it again in relation to a memory that I had of a friend of mine that I've lost contact with, but he was a friend of mine, and many years ago, a couple decades now past. This fellow had come onto the spiritual path, and he had met Swami Kriyananda and become a disciple, Paramahansa Yogananda, and he met Swami. And he was close to Swami in the sense that there was some connection there from past lives, perhaps. Because Swami always tried to include him in sort of intimate gatherings, social gatherings he would have him there, because this fellow was a very good raconteur, I guess you would say. He spoke well, and he was friendly and sociable and all of that. And so Swami would often, ask them, they would go on little excursions, and he would invite him along, and he was there in that circle, which was, could not be everybody, but he was included in, and the fellow was very pleased with that because Swami's inviting me to go on these things, and he took that as a mark of recognition of himself. Well, as time went by, actually 20 years went by. It wasn't just a little bit of time. About 20 years went by. And, in 20 years, life begins to knock you around a little bit. And he started going through lots of different karmic tests of this or that, and things didn't work out. And there comes a point when Swami would be very accommodating personally like this, but at a certain period of time, you've got to make it on your own. And so as time went by, this fellow drifted a little bit. And he had been given some responsible jobs, but he didn't have that magnetism that Swami had to be able to make people like him and follow his leadership. And so he's a little lacking there. But like I say, life knocked him around until finally, after 20 years, he decided to leave. Now, this is always somewhat of a sad thing. And Swami, of course, was very distraught over this because he had there was some personal connection there, obviously from previous lifetime of some sort. But he decided to leave, and he left. And didn't stay in touch particularly. But he did stay in touch because he'd been so long. He had friends in the community, larger community. And I had heard secondhand. Now, he didn't say this to me because I'd never had contact with him, I had heard secondhand that he had said to this other fellow, he says, I wasted 20 years of my life and now I'm having to start all over. And he had that view of what he had done, his 20 years with Anandans, with Swami. And I heard that, and I hope it was false, but the fellow did tell me this, and I thought, oh, that's sad. He had, in a sense, if he thought he had wasted that time, perhaps to some degree he had wasted that amount of time. And it's interesting because over the years I have heard people who are of worldly persuasion say this. It says, well, you're going to waste your time, following this is in the best years of your life, your youth, 20s, 30s, and toward you get a little on there. You're going to waste it. Why not, make use of your time in a good way? And you could make your career, you're intelligent, you've got all these talents. Why waste it on that? And you don't not going to be able to, the implication is not going to be able to fulfill those things that your life could fulfill. You can have family or whatever it might be. Career mostly is what's being mentioned here. And I have now in my elder years, I have had families come to me that their children want to take up the spiritual path and they complain about it. Says, oh, I'm trying to talk them out of it. They're wasting their life in this, and you must straighten them out. I think what they're afraid of is their children aren't going to care for them in the future. Maybe that's it, but whatever. There is a natural parental fear in that way. They want the best for their child, and they're not particularly spiritually inclined, but their children may be. And they try to dissuade them, and the thought is they're going to waste their life. And then they'll have nothing, and they'll get caught in this halfway zone like my friend that I mentioned, and he caught in that, and he had looked back and he said, oh, the best years of my life, I wasted them. That's a rough place to be in. And so maybe that yogi was saying you don't want to end up in that middle ground because you won't have what you aimed for when you took up the spiritual path, and you won't have the alternative in the worldly fulfillment that you could have because you're young, ambitious, and intelligent. And is not the Bhagavad Gita saying, is not Arjuna making that same complaint to a little bit that what if I try this and I kill everybody, and what if I don't succeed, and what if and I'm going to be in that halfway zone. And he was, in a sense, but he was in between the two armies, these various tendencies that were pulling him in different directions. He was in that halfway zone to some degree already. And he said, what if I'm here? And Krishna answers him, of course. And I think this is what we, of course, want to, you might say the answer that we're looking for is, what do we do? You could say it's a form, we are assaulted with doubts. And I think probably natural for most people, if you practice this or maybe any path, you're going to wonder, well, did I really make a foolish choice or did I make a good choice? I was so inspired when I came on, and that initial inspiration begins to wane a little bit, and you wonder, did I do the right thing? Can I not go back and redo this? And could I, should I? All of these things begin to arise. And Krishna consoles Arjuna. He says, no spiritual effort is ever wasted. It's not. No matter what we do, and even my friend who ended up thinking he had wasted his life, would I judge that it was a waste? I'm sad that he might have think that, but it was not wasted. And think about what Krishna says in the Gita. He says, even a little practice of this inward religion will free one from dire fears and colossal suffering. Little practice of this religion, little practice of this Dharma. No good effort is wasted. There's a story of Master. He was riding on a train in those days. That was the common mode of travel in America. And he would naturally get into a little bit of debate at times, conversations. He liked to converse, didn't like to argue, but people would confront him sometimes. And there was an atheist that Master was trying to convince and con, convert might not be the right word, but he was trying to open him up to higher potentials. And the man was not to be dissuaded from his point of view. And so the man said he says, you'll see when you die, when the time comes and you have to die, you're going to be very disappointed and there's not going to be anything there for you, and common, maybe atheistic point of view. And Master says, finally not wanting to argue, he says, well, sir, you may be so, maybe you're right. He says, but at least when the time comes, I'll have had the satisfaction knowing that I've done a good thing. I have done a good thing or something good. And in a sense, that in and of itself, not necessarily what the goal is. And you could say even, attaining something, you could even say that the idea we come onto the spiritual life, the spiritual path, because there's something at the end of the rainbow that we're seeking. Well, I don't think we can help but think that. It's human nature to think that way. But the journey itself is, to the large degree, and maybe to all degree for some, it's the satisfaction of knowing that we're living in the right way and that happiness is not going to be found at the end of the rainbow. And if you have that, you're going to keep on. It's like that mirage of the mountains that continues to recede as you proceed to it. You have to realize that we have it right now, and to live our lives in a way that we have happiness in the moment. That's what we want. So to that satisfaction of what I'm doing. Now, if you can't see that, and we see that, yes, as Master said, he said, I will be there when all of us, the time comes for my disciples when they pass from this body. To those who stick with it with devotion and energy and attention, I or one of the masters will be there to usher you into the other world, into the astral realms. And he said, but I don't mean this or just sticking it out just to stick it out. You couldn't just hanging on, well, I'm going to be a believer just because I have nothing else to, and I'm just hanging on onto the thread. He says, you can't go in that spirit. And if we do, you might say it's maybe because fear that, well, I can't turn around now. It's too late to go back and relive my life. And that's a sad place to be, in that middle ground. And there's a fear, I think, that some devotees have. And you could say it's doubt. Am I really? Is this path that I've taken up, is it the right thing for me? Did I do the right thing? Have I gambled my life on something that turns out not to be true and that I'm going to lose? Well, I titled this class, is the spiritual, taking up spiritual life, is a spiritual pursuit a gamble? And it is not a gamble. And gambling is when I guess you could think of it as gamble if you don't realize that the end is going to be there for us. And you're not gambling this. There's an old saying that, you shouldn't gamble. If you're playing cards, don't gamble. That's not good. But in the reply is, or the wise guy reply is, well, is it gambling when you know you can't lose? And because you're assured. And from a spiritual point of view, that's a good response. It's not gambling when we know we cannot lose, that God is going to be there for us, and Master's promise that they'll be there for us. And when we know God, it's not a gamble. Think of that story of the penniless boys in Brindaban. Was Master gambling that Divine Mother was going to take care of him? No, he wasn't gambling, because he was assured. Because he had that inner connection with Divine Mother, that assurance that comes from 100% faith in God, and it was based on experience. Now, for Jitendra, who went with him, it was a gamble. But he went along because at least he had enough faith in Master to go along with his crazy friend's ideas. He had that, and maybe Master forced him to go along. But for Jatendra to have taken up that on his own, that would have been a gamble. And because it wasn't backed by any personal experience that it was true. So if you're in that place of assurity, it's no gamble. If you're not, maybe it is a little bit. You're gambling. You're taking a risk. But think about the bird in the cage. The door is open. He won't step out of the cage. Even he wants to stay in the cage because, oh my gosh, I'm safe in here. And he won't even go and step out. But we know if you're going to be on the spiritual path and you want to grow, you always need to take a little risk, one step beyond your comfort zone. If you want to stay in your comfort zone, you're finding that you're not going to grow. And that I was thinking of too is Jatender from that same chapter. There's something reassuring about the clink of coins. He wanted to take some pocket money just to be on the safe side. The master wouldn't let him. No, you're not. That's not taking up the challenge properly. We always want a little bit of that security, but unless we're able to test ourselves a little bit beyond the boundaries of where we feel secure, we're not going to be able to expand to that. And no matter how far along you are on the spiritual path, you're always going to be there. But it's not really a gamble because we can look back of what's happened and we can see that God has supported us. God is up to this point. So surely God's going to help me to the next. Now, if you go too far in front, then it becomes a gamble. You could say we become what's the right word? We assume too much, and it becomes presumption if we go beyond the limits, more than one step, you might say, beyond the limits of our experience. But then as we grow on the spiritual path, we begin to see that God takes care of us. And the doubter, your doubts, the sense of what if this, what if that, you begin to put them aside. And you'll find that that if you succumb to those doubts and too much, or at all to some degree, you find yourself you're in that middle zone. And this is what Master referred to. He says, the doubter is the most miserable of men. Because you can never, when you're in that state of doubt, what happens is you can't commit yourself fully. The doubter lives too much in the mind and not enough through the heart. You can't accept anything but what if, what if, what if that, what if that, and you find that you cannot sustain it. But what happens? But then remember, even if one is a doubter and one says, no, I can't take that, I'm going to go back to the life that I know, and I'm not going to take that risk, it's okay. In the sense you have, yes, some sacrifices meant, but you're not going to be abandoned. Some people think, oh, if you take up the spiritual life, there's whole tradition that if you took up spiritual life and you renounced it and went back to the worldly life, people would shun you. People would think badly of you. Well, that's unfortunate. Let me just say that. Because God never abandons us, and Master never abandons us. I always, when somebody sometimes, people have come to me over, says, they're taking something of a step back, and they have all their reasons. They've rationalized it to the reason that this is something, and I'm leaving I'm leaving the ashram, I'm leaving the path to some degree. I always tell them one thing. I says, well, if that's how you have to do, you've got to go your way, find out. I says, maybe I'm a little sad about it, but I says, never abandon the guru. Keep that strong. And that's when I hear people that they have abandoned the guru, that makes me a little bit sad, makes me very sad actually. But I do know deep in the heart, and although they don't want to hear it, I'll tell them sometimes, the Guru will never abandon you. Because if that was a true connection, the Guru's promise is eternal. The Guru simply waits. And all we are doing is condemning ourselves to a few more lifetimes that we wander here, wander there. But the Guru will wait. Master said to Senor Caron from Mexico, when Mr. Caron, Senor Caron, met Master, Master recognized him immediately. He says, "Ah, Senor Caron, I lost sight of you for some lifetimes, but I will never lose sight of you again." And Senor Caron would, whenever he saw Master, would remind him, "Remember, Master, your promise. You're never going to lose sight of me." And he said, Master would say, I know, I promise." And that's a great reassurance and in the sense that the Master will watch out for us. But really it comes down to the Master watches out for us if we choose him. And it's really us who abandon the Master, and the Master watches at those times. So don't do that if possible, because then you're going to wander. But even then, you've benefited, because you will take that any contact with God, any contact with a Guru, any contact with a great saint, a great soul, any upliftment is never lost. It's always going to be there for us, and it's going to propel us, and the time will come. And we'll come to the point where we can overcome those doubts. Doubting, it'll eat you up. To some degree, a very logical person, is very mental. And Swami said this was how he was. He was very mental. He had to rationalize everything. And Master told him right away, he says, "You're too much, you're too mental, you need to develop devotion." And that applies to many people, especially in this modern age, very mental age. And you could say that it's for our own welfare. Sometimes we just can't figure everything out mentally, logically. And to the degree we do, we just have to, what my technique has always been, is I don't know, I can't figure that out. I'm going to put it over there in my, you might say, my locker over there, or the shelves on the wall. I'll come back to it when my mental state or when my experiential state has grown. And I find that works for me, because you just can't handle all of those things. And what if this or that? And it paralyzes you, and you find that you can't ascend above the clouds. Now, there was, as we came onto this webinar, Bar had put a very nice photograph of mountains, snow on the mountains in the distance, and the cloud cover was low on them, and so you couldn't see the peaks of the tallest one. And the spiritual path is like that. Everything is clear sailing, and we're walking and we're ascending, and we see our goal and we're going, and then we come to clouds, and we can't see a thing. And we're lost in the clouds or the fog on the mountainside, and we can tell up or down, but sometimes even we can't tell that, and we can get lost. And we think, oh, if we keep going, oftentimes we break through the clouds, and then there's clear sky. And as Master would say to some of his disciples, he has clear sailing about his disciples. He has clear sailing now. And that's when you go above the clouds, and then it's just a matter of making that final ascent. But sometimes we're in those clouds so long that we're lost, and we find that I need to become secure. Nighttime's coming. What do I do? So we have to go down below the cloud lever to where we get our bearings again. That happens. There's no shame in that if it happens, but it may be that we've consigned ourselves to taking more time than we thought it was going to take. Keep your focus on the Guru, and you'll be safe. And that'll guide you to finally, maybe that didn't work, but maybe you got to go in this direction or that direction. The Guru will pull you back, and you can have that memory of the Guru when the lifetime ends. You keep the Guru in your heart, and you'll be safe, and you'll be least guided to a good position in the next life. And this is what Krishna says: if you don't achieve your goal in this lifetime, don't worry. You'll be a yogi is born into fortuitous circumstances. in the next lifetime to be able to continue their journey. And Master says the same thing about the Kriya Yogi in this lifetime. If one doesn't achieve it, circumstances in the next life will be favorable to allow one to continue the journey. But nevertheless, while we're on this journey, beware of those doubts. It's only when we attain self-realization, God realization, that complete certainty can be attained. We're never going to have that complete certainty until we attain that state of enlightenment. So don't expect it. Realize there's always going to be that uncertainty to test our faith, to test our devotion, to test us. It only comes when we reach that goal. So you could say, we have to do our best, of course, with our mental capacities, but that doubting tendency, you need to put many of those things aside. Every question that has ever been asked has probably been asked already. And so we look to the saints for your guidance, for your example. Attune to the saints and say, I'll be like them. And then truth will be answered. All truths will be answered fully in that divine communion that comes. That's a wonderful thing to look forward to. And plus, look at it this way too. In the spiritual life, you come to a point, many come to this point, but I think everybody comes to this point, is that you realize that there really is no choice. You're never going to find what you want, and you realize this, accepting God. The worldly life is never going to satisfy you. This is the essence of Sankhya Yoga, really, is to convince us intellectually that that's the case. You're not going to find your satisfaction in that direction. So in a sense, you could say, I have no choice. I don't know. The road is rocky. The terrain is unknown. And I don't know what's around that next corner. Guru's my guide. I trust in him. And I trust that and what choice do I have? Like the fellow who was a mountain climber, one of Master's disciples, he was an alpine climber, and he went almost to the top of one of the mountains he was ascending. And maybe he was even making a first ascent on that route. And he came, and unknown to, because nobody had gone on that particular route before, there was a ledge there with a large overhang. And in order to traverse, he was pretty much free climbing. He was stuck on the ledge. And he could not go down because it's much harder unless you have ropes. So he was there, and he had to go, and he had to be kind of upside down in order to get over the edge of that. And it was impossible, seemingly. And he tried, and he kept falling back on the ledge, falling. And he said, well, I can't go down, so if I'm going to die here, night was coming, if I'm going to die here, I'm going to die trying. And so he kept trying and trying until finally he said he got to the point where he felt an external force pushing him against the rock, which allowed him to climb and stay on the rock until he got to the point where he could get over the edge, the lip, and he made his way up. And he said it was some external force that came, but he had committed himself. There was no doubts anymore because he had no choice. And you find that when you make that commitment, there's external forces come in to support you. Get rid of those doubts, get rid of that hesitancy. And I think this is the thing that, we get to that point. And maybe if you have to say, look, I have no choice because nothing is going to satisfy me other way, it'll help. I think one of the things that helps in that, in terms of overcoming doubts also, is this quality of loyalty. To latch on to something, and I'm going to stick to it. I'm going to be loyal to it. For me, I've latched on to loyalty to Guru, latched on to my spiritual path. I'm going to be loyal to that, to the end of it, and there's no looking back after a certain point. I'm going to go there, and I'm going to commit myself. I made this resolution when I was in my 20s, very early. I said, this looks like this is the real path, because it's not going to be easy. You know, the easy path is usually not the right path. And that was one thing that attracted to me. And I said, this is going to be a long path, I think. But I've got a guru to whom I'm loyal, and I will dedicate this lifetime at least. See, I can't commit beyond this lifetime. I don't have control of that. But to the degree I do have control, it's of this lifetime, and I want to commit to this lifetime. So be loyal. And you'll find in that loyalty, you'll find an extra power. Overcome, another thing is there's this tendency of the mind to be overly skeptical. And for the doubter, this can be deadly. You know, over skepticality, if that's a word. Adopt the habit instead of saying, let's try it and see if it works. And just keep trying. Don't automatically reject something. Take the role of the scientist and test it. And you'll see some things work, some things don't. But just to doubt it, leave it in the gray zone, is not fruitful. And so try it, see. And something that Master said, and Swami reiterated, he said, there's two qualities that if you're a doubter, look to joy. He says, because joy and doubt cannot coexist in the same cup or in the same bowl. Because when you're in joy, you are enjoying the fruits of your attitude at that moment. And when you're doubting, joy is impossible. So practice the stimulation of joyfulness. So try as much as you can to live in joy, to affirm joy, to feel joy, to be in that way. And there leaves no room in your consciousness for that doubtingness. And you can always go back if that doubt starts to creep in. Take a step back and say, what do I know? What do I really know? And a lot of things that we don't know for sure, we affirm them, but there are some things we do know, and that knowledge is based upon our inner experience. This much I know, and this much I can stand on as being true. And from there, I expand myself to the next possibilities. Sometimes we affirm so far ahead that it does become just belief. And we need to go more than just belief. We need to make faith in something that we can experience has some potential to be true, and so not so far removed from it. So you have to have positive expectations, naturally, but go by your experience. And this is true, and then build on it. And this helps quell the doubting mind. What can you do? I don't know if it's true, but this is what I can do. I can practice my Kriya. Master says if I practice this Kriya, it will take me to self-realization. Do I know that to be true? Not yet, but I'm going to practice it. I trust in my loyalty to Master that he was speaking of what he knew. Let me find out for myself. And so you find, if you're open to life, don't get too mental about things. Test yourself, yes. You can have little doubts, and if doubts raise an ability to test it, well, that's good. But remember, even if you come to the conclusion, oh, I guess it didn't work, and you turn back from the clouds and you go back down to the valley, you haven't lost anything. Maybe you've taken a little bit of time, but what have you taken time away from? Desires that really were not going to give you what you really wanted in the first place. So you really haven't lost much at all, and you probably have gained some wisdom. And you perhaps now you're going to gain your strength so that it'll come again. You know, the real gamble in life is not the spiritual path. You cannot lose. It's not gambling, because if you follow the spiritual path, there's nothing you can't lose. It's only good. Something good will come out of it in some fashion if you're sincerely acting in honorable, dharmic ways and approaching your goal in sincerity. It's only good. What gambling is hoping something will come that is ultimately not going to. You're going to gamble that you're going to get something good when the deck is stacked against you. You know, you can go to a casino and they have the slot machines there, and you can win a jackpot. You know, they have the big signs there. You know, 1 crore, you win the jackpot. Put your coins in or your tokens in. That's gambling because the slot machine is set that the percentages, if you play the slot machine, you might get lucky. That's gambling, hoping that luck will favor you. But in the long run, you keep putting those tokens in, you're going to lose. That's how the casino works. And life is like that. It's tilted that the odds, when you play the odds of the worldly life, in the end, you're going to lose. You may, hopefully, you don't lose wisdom. You gain a lesson. That didn't work. You go then, maybe a bit of time goes by and you come to that point where every soul comes to. You realize there's only one way out, and that's to rise. Rise in inspiration, rise ultimately in God. Put your energy in that direction, and then it'll take you to where all of us, really want to go, and that's to God realization. So it's not a gamble. The spiritual path is a sure thing. Just may take a little time, you know. That's all it is. And believe me, we have eternity, and sooner or later, in that eternal measure of time, God will come, Master will come. It's up to us to, you might say, determine when that time will be. But it's not a gamble. So have trust in God, have trust and faith in the Guru. So joy to you, all of you, and I hope to see you again next week. I should answer some. There are some chats here. Let me see. Volume is low. I can't do anything about that. I think that's Bara. But the second one is better to wear headphones. Okay. Time away from desires, no time lost meditating. Well said. Yes, that's true. That's all it is you're putting those desires on hold. And they're always going to be there until you rise above them. And eventually they give up. Say, oh, this he's not going to succumb to these things anymore. He'll go bother somebody else. So joy to you until next Monday. Om Guru.